Hello and welcome to Do You See What I See? I'm Yolanda Nava. Today we have an amazing guest. He is an entertainment executive, an activist, a producer, and an entrepreneur. He is Moctesuma Esparza. Welcome to Do You See What I See again, Moctesuma. We did this last in September of 2022, and now there's so many more things going on. But I'm so grateful that you're joining us today from the freeway and stuck traffic.
Well, Yolanda, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to this chat.
Well, we've known each other since we were both at UCLA, and you were completing your film schooling, and you were very successful in having your graduate project air on CNBC television right out of the gate. And you've done so many things since then, but I'd like to focus today on your contributions in the area of cinema and your entrepreneurial aspects. When we met again in the 2000s when I was in New Mexico and you were looking to create Maya cinemas there in New Mexico, uh, we did that, and then you went through COVID, and of course, everybody went back home. What made you initiate a new theater concept, Milagro Theaters in Los Angeles? You seem to be doing counter what everybody is doing. What
Well,
sparked
first,
you?
first, I have an abiding faith in movie theaters and the experience that the public has gathered together in a dark room to see a comedy or a horror film or a drama or an animated film extravaganzas that take you into a completely different uh, reality. And so I believe in that. And certainly over the last several years since COVID, the American public and the world public have demonstrated that if there's a movie they want to see it in a movie theater. So that works. And there's evidence for that. And I wasn't done growing the movie circuit, Maya Cinemas, when COVID pretty much shut it down and it could no longer grow after having a year and a half of no income. So I started a new company. And I knew that it was going to be a miracle to pull it off, and hence the name Milagro Cinemas.
Well, it's a perfect name. And you also created it in a very interesting sector of Los Angeles, the southeast sector, which I understand is becoming a real haven for fabulous ethnic restaurants, and you're close to freeways. What made you choose that sector?
Well, there was a theater available, and that's really what drove my wanting to be here at Norwalk, California. The landlord, Newmark Merrill, sought me out, and they wanted to change the image of their shopping center, the Norwalk Town Square, which is a landmark in the community. There's a huge tower that says Norwalk, and it's been a center of the community for maybe 30, 40 years. And there had been a theater there throughout that time, and it closed. The landlord wanted a different tenant, so they didn't renew the lease of the prior tenant. And we negotiated, and I got their support, and so decided to move forward to put a theater in Norwalk.
Well, it's an exciting endeavor, and I know I have to agree with you in terms of movie theaters because as a child growing up near downtown Los Angeles, I used to go to the Million Dollar Theater and some of the other theaters, those grand old theaters that were downtown with the draperies, and they were wonderful, exciting to go to those places. And I would go after my Spanish dance class over at what second or third and Broadway, Trinidad Godi. So I know the magic of theater. You've got developed different concepts, though. Tell us about the concept that you developed in your theater.
Well, it's a first run movie theater, right? And we show everything that Hollywood has to offer. And we're also a movie theater that is a cultural hub where we have events all the time, question and answer screenings with the cast, the director, the producers, for Latino films and independent films. So, and we've been premiering films that wouldn't otherwise get theatrical screenings. We just had a movie from San Salvador called Una Navidad Caracha, and the producer and the cast all showed, and there was a wonderful support from the Central American community. We had a screening of Paul Rodriguez's new movie, Holy Cash. He and his cast and all of the producing team showed up, and they had a great event. And we played his movie for a couple of weeks in the theater. And so it's something that we're excited about, that we can support independent cinema and Latino cinema and show Hollywood that there is a market and there's definitely an audience for these movies.
Well, the Academy Awards have been amazing these last few years. We've had some top directors in Mexico and elsewhere, garnering major awards. So there's tremendous creativity in the group. The stories are powerful. What drew you to film in terms of creating films that also have historical impact? I'm thinking of Milagro Beanfield War and, the Ballad of Gregorio Cortez, your Selena and your women's movies, Dorothy Dandridge, are all very powerful films and deal with historical subjects that are very important. What drew you to history?
Well, I was a history major at UCLA, so maybe that had something to do with it. Um, but I got drummed out of the history department by a professor because I didn't quote the book he wrote on California history, um, Professor Huntley. So he told me I had no future in the history department. So maybe I'm showing him up a little bit. Uh,
I didn't
so
realize you majored in history. I thought you were a film student, or was that
I
grad school?
started off. I started off my, as a freshman in history and did 2 years of a history major. But yes, when that didn't work out, I had created a film program at UCLA called Ethnocommunications. I wrote the outline for the curriculum and thought I was just doing what I did back then, which was to organize and to create opportunities for uh, Latinos and Chicanos to participate in an educational institution which had been denied to us for decades. So when it didn't work out for me in the history department, I went into the film school because they wanted me since I had created that program. And I had a new challenge of how to have a career, make a difference, continue my commitment to social justice in an area that I didn't really think there was any room for me or any space for me. But a professor there in the film school, at Lycée Taylor, African American, who collaborated with me in creating ethnocommunications and supported me as a professor, told me that I was missing understanding what was available and who I was. He said, "You're an organizer, that's a producer. You get people to do things, that's what producers do." And so I saw a possibility where I could have an impact on the image and the portrayal of Latinos in the United States and Hollywood, and through Hollywood, the world. And so that's what I devoted myself to.
Well, that was a fascinating first step, and it took your ingenuity and creativity to step forward and do that. I didn't realize you had studied history. That was my major, both as an undergrad and as a graduate student at UCLA when we met. So I've learned something new about you, and that's fascinating to me. But it is important to know history, and in those days, we were movers and shakers. We were challenging. You started earlier than I did, but you were involved in the East LA walkouts, and that was a very impactful movement initiative, and led on to more and more activity and activism across the board for many, many Latinos, not only in Los Angeles and California, but across the United States, where we have other populations in Texas and Florida and Chicago and New York. It's uh it's interesting to see the level of activism that was going on at that time. This is back in the late 60s and 70s, And of course, there was the Latino movement, the Black movement, it was already underway. The women's movement was underway. The Latina movement got underway. The Chicana, I like to use that term better, Chicano and Chicana movements were very active. And many of us received our larger opportunities because of our engagement in uh, improving and acting on behalf of the betterment of our communities. The Today we're in a very challenged place. Let's shift gears here a little bit because I think you have a background and a wisdom. You are a wisdom figure and background and a wisdom that perhaps can guide us somewhat in these challenging times that we're facing today, where there is some degree of protest and pushback. It seems to be effective in terms of getting the courts activated. But how do we regenerate that sense of hope and enthusiasm that we had back then?
Well, I think that youth um, is always the mover, just as we were in our youth. And our role now is to be supportive and to guide and to provide uh, all of the protection that we can. So, from that point of view, I think that the lessons of that we studied in history. I mean, we were standing on the shoulders of Bert Corona and uh, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta back then, and Reyes Lopez Tijerina and many other leaders in the generation ahead of us. And they were very important to us. And likewise, I think that we have a role to play in supporting and guiding the new generation. And direct action was what made a difference then, and I think it's what's going to make a difference today.
And so, how do we go about doing that? Because it seems to be the lack of understanding of going through what we went through, or even be close enough to people who perhaps were activists. I mean, a number of our generation, were their families were, or part of their families were deported back in the 30s, or went through the Operation Wetback in the 50s. We had Salt of the Earth back in the 50s. There's so many things that we were aware of, we became aware of. How do we how do we bring that forth when we have a generation that doesn't know history?
Well, I did make a choice to uh, make movies about historical events and people. They are more accessible than books are. Books require a time commitment and an emotional commitment, which is unsurpassed, right? What you can document in a book and share with people in a book is unique and been the source of protecting our legacies and our history for thousands of years, right? So when there are writings that survive, we cherish them, and so certainly that continues. And there is a new medium, right, which is the developed in the 20th century, this visual medium, which has an additional component that books don't have, which is the immediate engagement of an emotional experience. You
Yes.
can have that in a book, but not like in a movie. Um, that emotional engagement is transformative, and so that's what I've devoted myself to.
Well, you've devoted yourself across the line, across the decades to many very important endeavors. And the other one is education. You've been involved in supporting the concept of charter schools. Why did you find that so important?
Well, the Los Angeles Unified School District had never been our friend, and its mission was not to educate students, it was to protect the administrators and teachers who unionized and sought to put the needs of their lives above the needs of students. And a charter school movement, the legislation allowed for creating schools that were locally controlled, where the stakeholders were the parents, the teachers, the administrators, along with the organizers of the charter school. And so that's what we did. So I partnered with several other colleagues to start the Los Angeles Academy of Arts and Enterprise. Hector Orsi and Norma Orsi and Paul Cummings. So the four of us created this school with the concept that uh, artists need not be starving artists, and business people also need to have the enrichment of culture and art to lead full lives and to be engaged in a more meaningful way in their communities. So that philosophical seed became the basis for establishing the school. And with local control, with the engagement of the students and the parents, we established a school that has now prospered for over 15 years and is continuing to provide, uh, I believe, a meaningful education that includes the arts to students who are succeeding and going on to four-year universities and colleges and conservatories um, with a strong background that protects them and enriches them.
Well, the arts are very important and in so many levels because they open up the mind, they foster creativity. They've been given up to a large extent in many, many schools, and it's tragic. I know that New York years ago, when the art programs collapsed there, the artist community jumped in and began offering classes that were controlled by the artists themselves rather than the uh, school districts. So there was a great deal of creativity that was fostered. I don't know if we do that now. I've been out of touch with education in Los Angeles, but the need for the arts is vital. So perhaps something, more charter schools and that kind of
Yolanda,
concept. Let's pick up at where you left off. And we're talking about arts and culture and the importance of that. How do we sustain creativity in a culture where there is so much nonsense going on? How do we continue to teach history and truth in history?
That's a challenging question. I mean, the only way that I know to do it is to do it. I'm stumped to give you a better answer. The question of how to do something isn't like a set of instructions. It's an engagement and a doing. And just the discovering what works is something that happens in the process of doing.
I think that's a very interesting point, Mokti, because certainly when when I was involved in the Chicano movement with Gloria, she was 20 and I was 24, we didn't know anything really. We just jumped in and saw a need and said something's got to be done about this. And I remember being at a meeting with Phil Montes, and it was the California Commission on the Status of Women movement that Francisca Flores pushed us into. And we went, and I saw that it was all elderly women with white hair that were there, and there were no younger representatives. There's no diversity. And I said to Phil Montes, because I was sitting next to him, he was on the Western Regional Commissioner on Civil Rights, and I said, shouldn't we be doing something about this? And that's actually how I met Richard Alatoria. That's a whole other story. But the idea that we have to see a need and then we have to jump in, isn't that what you're saying? And we start by doing something with one or two or the power of two or five. It so much can be done with a handful of people.
Absolutely. 2% of the people engaged and active can change the course of history.
Well, I think we need to focus on that and let's pray on it and act on it. And I want to thank you for joining me today. I know you've been in your car and a lot of traffic, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. I think you have so much wisdom, and I really do honor and respect you tremendously, Mokta, because you have been out there for so many decades and you continue to work to make our world a better place, not just for Latinos, but for all people. And you've done it through creativity, through your activism, through your entrepreneurship. So God bless you, and may you keep going and have the strength to keep continuing on into, your 90s and perhaps even into your hundreds. Thank you so much for joining me today. And to
Thank
the
you.
audience, thank you, Mokte. And to the audience, be sure and tune in March. I'll be interviewing the acclaimed writer Victor Villaseñor, and on March 1st, so that'll be posted soon. We're now just a podcast format, so that makes it easier for people to tune in from wherever you are. I thank you for watching. Join me again next month for Do You See What I See? I'm Yolanda Nava.